go get started at 1:15.
Okay, Mayor, our next big move is to focus on the Southern Identity focal points, and Nika is going to be introducing that, but before she does that, I just want to remind and make the connection for the items that you all said you wanted to focus on when we had this conversation last night. Rudy, the issues about zoning, real estate deals, the opportunity in 2015, this is particularly related to the things that you're concerned about there. Several of you mentioned the mall, of course, and so that comes into this focal point, though not so much this particular plan because it's on the other side. And there were a couple of comments about gateways and the importance of having something that's really distinctive. So all of those issues that you all identified as priorities for 2015 are going to come up today under this topic, and we'll be recapping your direction after Nika and the team do their presentation.
Thanks, Karen. So I just want to kind of make some introduction and a little background on this project that we're working on for our consulting team, which we have Mark and Sherry with TBG and Jason with Catalyst, who will also, and of course, try to say that. And so everybody has been working on this project, giving input on what we can do on the Southern Gateway, basically. So the Southern Gateway is important for many reasons. One, we already have a partnership in place with the Hawaiian communities. We have already established a TIF. That TIF needs to perform. So basically what we had planned when we started on that project was to take advantage of the DCTA station there. So we have a DCTA station, we have a partnership, and we own a large piece of property down there. So the piece of property was, of course, given to us in addition to some land swaps with the Hawaiian communities. Altogether, we own about 114 acres in that, right at that gateway at I-35 and 121. Of course, again, it's a very critical area for us right at the entrance to the city. Then after we did the 2025, not only the gateway part of it, but also connection to the green became very evident in that area, and some of it is in the floodplain. We own the property, we can do something with it, we can actually distinguish ourselves as we are driving from the southern end to Lewisville at a fairly quick pace. So with that, I want to bring Mark and Sherry up to kind of start the conversation. This has been a partnership, actually the planning part of it, the funding for this plan has been a partnership with DCTA, us, and the Hawaiian community. So all three have been involved. They are on board. We had a stakeholders meeting with them last week, so they have kind of seen this plan, and they realize what the city is trying to accomplish, and of course, everybody's pretty much on board.
All right, thank you, Nika. Again, I'm Mark. I'm going to be up here presenting this. I guess I was chosen to present right after lunch. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but hopefully we won't dim the lights. And if you do nod off, we'll throw something at you down here. But as Nika said, this has been about 6 months with us getting this plan together to get in front of you guys. And as Nika had pointed out and talked about, this being a gateway to the new Lewisville, this is a great opportunity right now for you guys to sort of come together as a city and sort of see what's going on. Just to get everybody acquainted with where we are and what we've been studying, you know, everybody's very familiar with 35 point up here, and then you've got 121 on the southern side of the property. What's outlined in red right here is the area that we've been studying, and we've actually taken the liberty to increase that study and actually push over a little bit to the west side of 35 that we'll talk about too within some of these ideas. Approximately, that's about 325 acres. Some of it's developed, some of it's raw land, and some of it is development that actually is failing right now, and we'll talk about that too. One of the first things that we do whenever we get involved with a project is we want to study that area as much as possible. So we have been driving around the area a lot. You guys know the city much more than we do, so we want to try to become experts at it. But one of the instrumental things is understanding what some of the city's big ideas were in the past that have been documented. And you guys had a plan that had big moves. And in that big moves, one of the big portions of it was this big green swath that came down here, and sort of having an interconnected park system on the east side of the town. And then also, you know, everybody's identified you have a lot of employment centers. You have a focal point here with the mall and everything that's happening with that right now. And if you start to look at that, there's a lot of dynamics and everything moving in this area. I think the biggest thing, this really is the gateway coming in from Dallas up to the north to the city. And it's very, very important to create an identity and something that speaks about your all's future. With this, we've also been studying and working with all the different stakeholders that Nika said. As you can see right here, we've got a map that's got different colors on it. The green areas are the holdings that the city has right now. The blue is what Huffines has. The Hebron 121 development is their development that they are going forward with right here, and I know you guys are very familiar with that. There's also another parcel called the James Tract, which is 19.2 acres. This tract is actually being affected by the expansion of the highway system and the flyover coming this way. So that used to be a larger tract. It's actually getting smaller. And as you guys know, it's also affecting some of these businesses that are going along I-35 all the way through town, and especially this area right here. And then last is the DCTA area. They have 9 acres that we've been looking at to combine all this together. You know, one of the things that we wanted to start off with, instead of really getting into the physical plan, is talk about sort of the philosophy that we're trying to put in this project. One is we're trying to create an identity, not for this project, but for the entire city, and that's why we've talked about this being sort of a new gateway to Lewisville. The other one is connect, and I call it connection. It is very, very important because you have all these different property owners that you guys come away with a vision that everything is very walkable and very connected together. And that helps from an economic viability standpoint. And I also want to point out is that we feel that maybe long-term you have a connection also possibly to go over 35 into the mall area. We'll talk about that in more detail. Lastly is activate, and that's placemaking. And you guys can see that a lot in what Dallas is doing in some of the other second ring suburbs, is that they are really trying to create a placemaking area, much like you guys are doing with your downtown plaza right now, to bring people together, create a sense of community, and that is a very important part of this plan. So with that, as we said, this is a big study area. So we've looked at it in basically 5 different districts. One is the Gateway District, which is the area that spans 35 right here. The other one is what we're calling Hebron 121. The station, which is centered by the DCA platform that they have right now. We're calling an area to the south over by the tollway, the boardwalk. And then also on the very far side, we're calling one an environmental showcase. And we're going to talk very specifically about each of those. As far as an overall master plan, this is what we've shown. And I do want to preface this. This is a very big vision. And the idea, this is creating hopefully a very solid framework for the city for the future years to come for 5, 10, 15 years. So things could change somewhat, but what this wants to do is try to get some very big ideas out there. The first one is really creating a very strong gateway for the city. And as you're coming up 35 right here, the ability to redevelop the retail that is on the both sides of 35 and actually creating a gateway bridge. If you look at traffic patterns in this area, it's very hard to move around. The only way to get through 35 is actually Hebron right here because the tollway is limited access. So if you're over here, and hopefully in the future you want to get over here, the idea is that you don't have to take a 2-mile loop to get through that area. You know, we've sat with some of the staff and we've talked about could we do this from an engineering standpoint with all the new improvements, and we do feel that there needs to be more study with it, but we do have an opportunity possibly to make that connection. And the reason that's important is because making a connection gives you much more options. It's like the old days when we started to develop subdivision cul-de-sacs. We pushed everybody out to one road, and it made it very limiting. Nowadays, especially with mixed use and urban design, more connections are better, and also from a walkable standpoint. So that's the gateway area. As we come across, that bridge would actually come down and go right into the bridge and what we're calling sort of the improved stream area right here that goes into Hebron 121. We feel it's very important to make this strong connection from a pedestrian and a vehicular standpoint. We'll talk about more details of how to redevelop this retail right here. As we make our way past this area, we go into Hebron 121. Huffines, as you guys know, have been working on that. It's primarily multifamily in this area in an urban environment, and now they are actually pushing further down here. With that, the city does have land that you guys need to look at from an economic development standpoint in this area right here. So what we are proposing are a series of townhomes to bring in a diversity of product within this area. Right now, with all the apartments right here, we feel that some type of for sale unit is what's needed in that area, but we also have the tollway that we need to worry about. So making sure that we have some flexibility, that we're not putting development all the way up there, but we're also bringing in some type of open space to link this together is very important. Then up here we have the DCA station, where we're looking at how can we bring in other types of uses to that, and we'll go into great detail here in a minute on that. And then on the very top portion, we have the area that is owned by Huffines and also the city. What we'll show on this is a combination of retail, office, hotel, and conference center in this area. One of the things that you'll notice with this plan is that everything is very connected, and we want to try to make everything as urban and walkable as possible. And that's very important for long-term values of how this area grows and how it adapts. Some of these buildings in the future might go away, but the idea is that you're creating a very solid framework for new buildings and new opportunities and new uses to come in a sustainable way. Not one to where we put the big parking lot out in the back and now we have a 200,000 square foot user and we don't know what to do with it. What we're trying to do is create a plan that is very flexible with that. And then on the very end, what we call the environmental showcase. This is an area that there are tons of proven data by integrating large civic open spaces into it. It creates long-term value. I think you guys can see this with Park Plaza that you guys are doing. Also, if you look around White Rock Lake in Dallas and Clyde Warren, these are great examples to show how they are elevating the value of real estate around them. The other idea with this is that this is a very dense mixed-use area when it's all built out. There's not a lot of open space. In fact, Hebron 121 right here has open space. It's all privatized open space only for the people that live there through their pool complex. What you guys need is a really good park system that creates social opportunities and placemaking, and we see that possibly happening here, making a connection across the train track to this area, and then actually interconnecting that with the pedestrian bridge that goes down to this retail and entertainment center right in this area. To bring this up, we call this phase one. We don't know if it'll be your phase one, but this is the first area we wanted to focus on. I-35 comes right down through this area. This dark red line right here, this is the James tract, that's the 19.2 acres. If you look at all these smaller red lines right here, these are parcels of existing restaurants and entertainment that you guys have that is actually being taken out by the expansion of the highway. So what we wanted to show, because there is the possibility to activate this area first, is how this could develop. So long term, we have the Gateway Bridge that comes across, but right now in the first 5 years is the ability to come back and replan this area to where you have an existing road that comes in that will hit the bridge that goes over Hebron 121 and bring in a layer of retail and entertainment to this area. And this is done in an urban fashion to where we're actually taking the retail buildings or restaurant buildings, fronting them on the street right here, bringing parking in, and then bringing a green where these guys front on here to create placemaking. But one of the biggest opportunities you guys have with the existing water body in the back is to start bringing in retail, restaurant, and entertainment venues to where they back up against that area right there. And that's a huge advantage that you guys have to have water and bring these areas in to where we can have patios and walkways that actually front out to that area and create a sense of sort of place, unlike most other areas. And then, of course, a potential pedestrian. Whoa. Oh, hello. You got that, Sherry? If you touch this, does it move?
Yes.
Yes.
It does.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Should have told you.
I was just surprised.
Sorry.
I'll stand back a little bit further. So what this is about 110,000 square feet. We're just calling it mixed use right now. It could be from office to restaurant to retail within this first phase. We've shown 550 parking spaces, which would adequately park this. So this is a doable plan right here. Some of the ideas and images that you see over here is the idea for creating some type of pedestrian or vehicular link across 35 can be played down and create signage, or it can be sort of an architectural icon if you want. Those things still need to be fleshed out. But the idea, this is creating a very strong gateway to the area. And then just sort of some other images that show how retail can be incorporated sort of in an urban setting through that area. From a perspective view, the area that we're talking about again is this area right here. So you can start to see how the building forms are taking shape and they're coming along the stream right through here. That phase 1 road that's coming into Huffines is this area right here. So you can start to see how you can get to it from access of the service roads going through here. And long term, the ability to come from Hebron and come through here and also activate it from this way. What this starts to do, it is adding a needed use to all the residential that's going over here. This is all multifamily, it's single use. What we need to do is have the ability to bring in other uses in a mixed use setting. And that is providing really sort of just neighborhood services, but also community services to the entire city. Nika?
I just wanted to add that when we created the zoning for Huffines, it's actually zoned mixed use. But right now, truly what they're developing is that single use with their multifamily, and they're having some changes that they're going to bring to you fairly soon. But the idea and the promise was that the entire area was going to be zoned to mixed use. That's how you bring in the rest of the part of the mix, which is non-residential, in a very high quality non-residential. Again, in order for our TIF to perform, by performance means basically bringing enough increment tax dollars so we can pay for all the infrastructure that we had planned on doing. And so Jason is in the back, he's been doing our market studies. So we are looking at this area for whatever the market demands, but this can be really start from a low-rise to your mid-rise Class A office buildings, all the way to an entertainment area with a lot of restaurants and a lot of places to go, basically. So it's very important to keep in mind that the mixed use truly needs to happen. It's for many, many reasons that we need to have those mix of uses instead of single use. And right now, we do have some zoning in place that's kind of prohibited of that, or could bring in some uses that you may not want at the gateway. So that's something to think about.
Just sort of a enlargement of that area if you're coming in off of the service road right here, down the existing roadway, of how these buildings can start to face it and also face the waterway and then out to the open space. Right through there, you can see the existing development of Huffines, and this is their future development on this side over here. And potentially some of the city's development that you guys own as an economic stimulus to really sort of bring in a for sale product possibly. The other area, and we're sort of calling this the boardwalk, the green, one of the things that we feel is very important is trying to create a diversity of spaces and the placemaking. This, of course, right here is taking an area that's right next to the tollway and trying to utilize it as park and open space because you have so many residents living up here. This plan right here actually shows the entire area as park. The next one we'll show you is slightly different because we wanted to give you some options with that. The idea of this is actually getting out with the boardwalk to engage the waterway right here, actually bringing up some type of topography or hill to make an amphitheater to where you can have performances, bring in people to this area that starts to also mitigate the tollway. That tollway is a big, loud conveyor of cars. So if we can find other ways to soften that, that's one. And then also making a connection to Carrollton with their parks and trails that they have planned in the future right here also is very good, because what that does, that helps extend your system a lot further in the future. It might not be your system, but having access to other city systems are very important. This one actually shows how we can decrease that park space and actually reclaim this for development. This right here shows 83 townhomes in this area as a for sale product. What it does, it limits the open space to about 300 feet right here. And we feel that's important. We feel based on the tollway and the amount of volume of traffic through there, we don't want to go any closer than 300 feet. We feel the closer that we got to that tollway, you have a diminishing value in the real estate. So our suggestion is keeping about a 300-foot buffer through that area and then taking the advantages of reclaiming some residential product in that area. One of the things that I thought was interesting is during this process, we were pushing for more open space. Nika was pushing for economic development, and I'm glad she did, because actually going through this study, and that's why we're showing these options, was important for the entire team to talk through. We also worked with Huffines quite a bit to understand what they're doing up here. They're actually going through a process right now where they are trying to diversify their housing. They will still be rental, but they're also looking at rental townhome, maybe a big house concept, to where they're not all one type. So what we've done, we've taken their master plan and we're looking at that road system of how it makes a connection into that. All right, the station. Of course, we call this the station right now because it is centered by the existing platform station that DCTA has in this area. This is also interesting because this is one of the areas that you have 3 different property owners in this area. That, of course, is the Huffines on A, B, and C. The city has D and E, and then down here, we don't have anything marked for it, but it's DCTA in that area right here. One of the things that's very important in creating an urban area is that we don't take Hebron and the frontage on Hebron and slice it up and you get pad sites everywhere. That could probably be the worst thing that happens to where you get in a gas station, fast food chain, anything that else. I'm sorry? Storage, anything like that. So what we wanted to do is try to create a form that is urban in context, but also from Hebron, it has a very consistent edge. So Hebron's right up in this area right here. So what we've looked at, we're calling it office right here, but it could still be mixed use, is coming in with a long consolidated building to where you have maybe, you could have 5 different users in it, and it could go to different leasers, but it is one building. It's not chopped up into small pads. What that does is start to create a framework up on Hebron that creates a much more pleasant view and environment. But as we make our way down to the station right here, what we want to do is the future buildings, taking those and putting those on the road to make that road feel very urban and very engaged. Very similar to what you guys have in downtown right now, where you have on-street parking and the buildings are very close to the road. That's important for actually creating a sense of place. So in that area, we've actually parked the areas in between, or basically behind, and have convenience parking in the front with parallel parking. As we make our way to the station, one of the thoughts that we've worked on is actually looking at a small conference center and a limited service hotel in that area, and we feel that's important, especially with DCTA, the ability to have all the mixed uses here and sort of combining all this stuff together. So that's what we're showing in this plan right here, and that actually comes close to the platform. As far as transportation, there's 2 ways into this. Off of Hebron, one here. They all come to a roundabout that's right here at the station where you can drop off, and you can funnel your way around, go back out to Hebron, or take this road that goes down and connects to a, not underpass, but a pass across the railroad to get to Hebron 121. With this also, we're showing some ideas on E right here of how to create some incubator space. One of the things that we're seeing with a lot of cities is how do you get the creative class into your city? And these are people that are basically startup firms that maybe all they need is 400 square feet, maybe 1,000 square feet. So what we're showing on that are 4 small buildings right there to where somebody could rent out, and they can maybe rent out half of that building, they could rent out the whole thing, but it's for a startup. And it's really trying to create a company that has an investment in Lewisville as another way of looking at economic strategy within that area. And then lastly, we've also talked about how do we get people to this place within placemaking. And this building that we're showing right now, we're calling it a nature center. It could actually be a museum. It could be anything that has a civic nature to where we're trying to draw people to this area. And that's important because that's going to fit into this big park system that we show over here. As we go across the tracks right here, one of the things that we wanted to look at is DCTA, and talking to them, they said they have become more flexible and looking to figure out how they can take their parking lots and actually activate those with buildings and different uses. So, they're looking at possible partnerships with that. And here we're showing 3 buildings in this area. They could go anywhere from office to restaurants to mixed use. And the idea is to actually bring a building to where it's up against the station to make it feel like that station has some eyes and some presence on it. When you have transportation like this, what you want to do is be able to make sure people feel safe and comfortable in that setting. That's why that building is placed there. And then also looking at some other buildings as you come down off the station to actually buffer against the existing utility pole that is back here, and then configuring new parking back in this area and some parking up through here. One of the things that we did hear the other day from our stakeholders that we were very encouraged with is Huffline says they're trying to work with DCTA to make a better connection from their development to this development. And if we can do that, I think that's a win-win. Right now, we're not showing that connection, but if we can make that happen, I think that would be very positive. The way it's planned right now is people would have to come out this way to get over here, and I feel we can do better with that. This is a view basically looking from Hebron back to the area. The station is right here, so you can see the look on Hebron, buildings lining Hebron, then the roadway incoming here, and the buildings around the station right here. And then just another view right here of the station and how we can start to get many more people, especially if we have a conference center and a hotel. Getting that activity around that station I think is very important. One of the things that I've thought about, if you can get a conference center in this area or a hotel, is their ability, because of this line and getting closer to the university, that we can have some synergy between those right there, and actually working with the university to bring some type of conference to this space right here and promoting sort of a sustainable atmosphere. Then lastly, we call it environmental showcase. Basically what it is hopefully a great park system. I think the city has had great thought leadership as far as the new park that you guys are doing downtown of creating sort of culture and awareness. So this idea right here, this whole area is going to be detention anyways. You've got flood control issues. We're trying to bring development up out of the floodplain right here. So this is unusable really for development. So what we're showing right here is a large lake system that actually can sort of be sustainable in itself, to where we're taking the drainage from this development right here and actually catching it in wetlands and cleansing this water before it goes into the lake right here, as an idea of showing how Lewisville and your all's thought process is sustainable, but also creating a great trail system that goes around that's engaged over water, over land, over water, to create sort of different significant areas, and then also connecting with the canoe launch. As the city right now, you guys are working on that, I think with Half and Associates, and trying to connect all these systems up. In the future, this trail system would keep going up north, and it would go south over to the Hebron 121 area.
Just wanted to add that we are trying to create a value, leveraging our land for the value for the private property, which is exactly what we've done in Old Town. So we invest in our property, which may not be buildable or developable for buildings and commercial property, but having something like this will add value to the private property that's going to be coming to the adjacent to this property. And remember, this property is kind of squished between a highway and a landfill. So we need to do something with it in order to get that higher uses if we want.
All right, and then lastly, one of the things that we wanted to focus on is Hebron Parkway. You know, Hebron sort of has been treated as this road that's next to the landfill and next to this land that hasn't developed, and you have a wall system right now that's sort of falling down. One of the things that we noticed by going out there and driving that is the wall really is not doing any good. You look right over that wall and you still see that landfill every day. And I know there's some failure in that wall right now. So one of the solutions here is actually, if security is an issue of people getting on the landfill, then let's take that wall down and let's put just maybe a black chain link vinyl fence further down the hill, maybe 50, 100 feet away, and come in and treat Hebron as basically a nice urban parkway, almost like a greenway parkway. Bring in trails on both sides right here, bring in nice planting through the middle. And what this does, if you think about it, is when you're actually viewing the landfill, your eye, when you're in a car, actually keeps going up and views up. So long term, by putting trees along this area, that's cutting that cone of vision off to the landfill and starts to mitigate it and make it look softer. Your view, if you're looking from here through the wall, I like to touch things, you're actually seeing underneath the landfill right here. So one of the proposals with this is to come in and redo that area. This has actually been very successful in Arlington. This is the landfill in Arlington. This is Collins right here. A development right next to that is called Viridian. It's about a 2,000-acre development. They have sold about 500 homes right now. Thank you, Sherry. And as you can see what they've done here, they've done a similar treatment, and the landfill is actually back behind that. So from that area, it's starting to soften and screen that area through there. And they've done a great job of trying to sort of take a negative and make it a positive. Also, one thing to remember in talking about this is that that landfill has a lifespan, from what I've heard, of only 10 more years. My wife grew up in Indiana, and there are a lot of great examples where they've taken landfills, they've made golf courses out of them, they've seeded the entire hillside with wildflowers. So think about in the springtime that this could be all bluebonnets, or it could be Indian paintbrushes. You know, in the future is that you guys could create something out here that is almost like a mosaic art piece of people driving by, and it's a temporary thing, you know, for 3 to 4 weeks during the year, but people have that anticipation of looking at it again. So just some things that I think you guys could do from having a negative and turn it into a real positive for the city.
Stop there, Mark. So we have had this project on hold until we could talk with you guys at the retreat. If you drive down Hebron, you'll see a wall that really does need to be replaced or removed. We wanted to see what Mark and his group thought would be the best. And the natural screening, it does appear to me, if you look, with those pine trees, those tall trees in the back, the cedar trees, not pine, cedar, they do a very nice job. And I think that a live screening, really, when you talk about the 2025 plan and the whole green concept, it's kind of nice. You come in from Carrollton and they've got their, sorry, Brendan, their brick walls, and then you drive in and then it's green. And it's that green entryway, again, another gate feature. So based on their review, our recommendation would be to take the brick wall down and go with a live screen. And that would be a decision we need to make. I'd like to see you guys give us some direction at retreat.
That is ours, you got it?
Yes.
How far back does our property go before you get to the property line?
It's a couple of feet behind the wall in those trees. I don't know if you see it.
He had been mentioning it's possible moving it back like 20 feet. We don't have 20 feet to move it back.
No, but what I would do is go to the landfill and ask for either an easement or donation of that property. It's on a slope,
It goes downhill, so there's really not a lot of value to that.
I know what it is, but I just want to know where our property line is, so we got to get easement or
It's a few
donation.
feet behind the wall, but yeah, I think we can make it work. And their security fence is some distance off of that. The landfill itself actually has either a barbed wire fence or some kind of fencing along that for security.
Well, if they've got a security fence, why would we need to put up the fence?
We might not.
We might not.
You might not.
Might not.
Well,
But
so why are we proposing it?
Because it's
We
the
don't need
future.
it, why are we?
Well, I think
I'll tell you why we're proposing this, because we've driven by it. I have not gotten out of my car and walked down past that fence. So if this was to go further, we would definitely do something like that.
Trying to keep other people off of it.
And if it was something that there are areas that are not fenced that they have a concern with,
Right.
that we can simply fence that with some kind of open wire fence.
Why? I certainly have a problem doing the green stuff in there. On the fence, if it's not needed, I don't know that we need to do the expense of the fence. Just take the wall in.
That's what we're saying, you have a live screen wall.
Do we have enough room to do so? We only got a few feet behind that.
We probably have to go to waste management, get some additional land through the easement.
And widen the sidewalk at the same time.
Yes. Yes, sir.
I think one of the important things too, also, if you think about Hebron, and you know, it's a major arterial, and there's a lot of traffic that goes through there. But long term, by putting in trees and screening like this is 10, 20 years, once that's grown up, that's really taking that road and makes it feel much smaller, you know, to where it has a much better scale. Right now, it's just a big road and a big open space.
So does the council have a problem with them working with waste management, seeing what kind of property they'd be willing to donate or allow, give us an easement to use, taking the wall down, and if need be, replace it with a fence, if not leaving the fence out and putting the green space in there with a wider sidewalk? Don't have a problem doing that for it?
I'm all for exploring our options through here, to see
Okay.
what we can do.
Okay.
Thank
So
you.
getting this, what you need?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Move on.
All right, and then back to the master plan. One thing I'll say with this is a master plan, it's a vision plan, it's a long-range plan. The idea, though, is to create a really good sort of framework or skeleton to put in place so as things start to develop and economic development starts to happen, you guys have a roadmap of creating something to where you're not developing things that are haphazard through this area.
And shuffle developers, basically you'll be taking this plan to developers that would be interested in developing this type of development versus your typical what I call marginal highway development. So that's one of the major purposes of it. And then it takes shape with the market, what the market demands, but in that frame. So like the hotel conference center can turn into something else that would attract people, like an event center that we had talked about before.
Anybody else have any comments or questions on what they saw here?
Oh.
So you've already provided the direction on the Hebron Parkway changes that you just talked about. Nika, it's my understanding that you're going to want to come back and have some further discussion and have council take action on this plan, because you then have a plan in place that you can use to show people. So part of what we want to make sure of today is to get any other preliminary feedback, any other questions from y'all, so that when Nika comes back to do a follow-up briefing, that she knows what information you're looking for or what direction you'd want to see, so that we'll be able to then have something that you'll be able to take action on.
Council, got anything else? One thing I would tell you is and I mentioned it before, I think y'all are looking into it, is it Timber Creek goes under? Remember that culvert that goes under? Look and see if we could utilize that instead of having to do that bridge over. That bridge over is gonna be several years down the road and a big expense. Where that culvert's already there, it might be, there'd be times where it would be unusable, but most of the time I think it would be useful. A lot less expensive.
Just a little further up and be.
Right,
Since
and
you
not
brought
much
it up,
further, it's still within walking distance.
Yes.
It connects you all back through there.
And I think it's important, however you guys can find to make that connection, I think it's really important.
Okay. And do I take that to assume that they should go ahead and proceed with the direction, that you're supportive of the direction so far that you're seeing?
If we'd like to bring it back to the that we adopted all of the other plans to have to adopt the plan. Because adopting the plan formally will help us when we discuss with developers if this is the plan in place.
And it's important to have that in place. It's important to say, this is what we're expecting. So, okay. Nika, any other direction that y'all are seeking at this point?
Any other suggestions?
Okay, then I think our next big move then is for Old Town. Again, there were a number of things that y'all talked about last night that relate to Old Town, as far as wanting to see new kinds of residential options, new kinds of building types, connections with DCTA. And so there were several different things that you talked about that come back to continuing the investment in Old Town. And so I think for this part, Nika and Jason are going to start off first, and then Trent second. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
And that's it. I'm just going to be very, very brief, because most of the talking. As you know, Jason has been involved with the Old Town and actually strategy for our retail, what we call the merchandising of the city, and looking at various retail areas in the city. But mostly we've been concentrating with him on Old Town, as we wanted to activate Old Town sooner than the other locations. So one of the other locations that Jason was working on was Hebron 121, and he's still engaged on that. And of course, Main, on the west side of Main. But Old Town is one that he's been focusing on for this year. So he's been doing a lot of market research, a lot of who we are as a city, what kind of retail we have, what kind of retail we're striving for, what should we go after. And again, specifically, how can we capture that retail in relationship to downtown, to Old Town. So with that, Jason, we can have this.
Thank you, Nika. And it's an honor and pleasure to be here. As Nika mentioned, we've definitely been integrated into a lot of the activity in Old Town, and hopefully, as you've seen, we're making a little bit of progress with the Old Town development, and look forward to continue making progress. I think what I want to do is just kind of catch up to speed and give you an overview, and I'm going to go through this quickly, but overall our process was to get context. We started early on with the market analysis, really did stakeholder input, and spent a lot of time at the property level looking at availability and local context and sort of the nuances of the fabric. We assembled all the information and sort of synthesized it in what we consider a merchandising plan. It sort of has twofold purposes. One is informative on your end. The other way is just a way for us to engage our thoughts and engage or organize the data that we've collected in the last part, which is the part that we really enjoy is actually the implementation of the activation. We're working with the developers, the property owners, and the end users, trying to work out the kinks based on what we think the market opportunity is. For you that aren't necessarily retail, versed in retail, the core drivers of retail are generally always population. The additional drivers that you have a significant amount of capacity for would be the daytime drivers, and we'll get into that in a little bit. The other opportunities would be sort of the visitor wallet. If you think those people come and spend money for a couple of days and then leave, and you definitely have events and opportunities to expand that, especially downtown with the event center and some of the events that you already program. And I think what makes downtown unique is the connector between 121 and 35. You definitely have a commuter opportunity, people that are just passing through because it's convenient. You can save 10 or 15, 20 minutes, sometimes more off of your commute. And then the additional drivers would be sort of institutional things as they evolve. They don't really fit into any other bucket as they evolve. So I'm going to look at a couple of things. Usually population and income are always your dominant variables when you're looking at retail, and it describes the purchasing power. So if you wanted to look at just some benchmarking, Lewisville sort of fits in the middle as it relates to income. You're not the most affluent community, but you're certainly not the most disadvantaged community, so you sort of fall in the middle. If you look at the per capita income, as you look at maybe perspectives of the way the retailers look, the per capita income in Lewisville, so to come to some of the other peer communities, could be somewhat low. And part of that's just because you have a broad population base, so you've got a big range of essentially population in general. But that certainly has an impact if you look at just the distribution of home values. You don't have the large peaks of some of the other broader housing stock, and that's why I like plans like Mark, where you can and Sherry, where you can start integrating different product types and mixing things up and offering different housing choices, which certainly can drive significant retail value. When you look at the population, within a 10-minute drive time, your population does sort of measure on the bar, and is certainly significant compared to some of the peer markets, and would be certainly attractive as it relates to the core underwriting of retail. And then when you start looking at this, if you look at the income times the residential purchasing power, then you start to really make a lot of sense. And this has been sort of some of the value propositions if you start to think of what is our pitch book or strategy on things downtown, or what would our regional approach be. It would really, not necessarily promoting that you're the most populous city in the region or necessarily the most affluent, but if you combine those two variables, you have more purchasing power than the majority of your communities around here. And that's been very accretive in us making some advances with some brands that may not consider the market on a standard 1-3-5 mile geography, which is sort of the traditional approach.
When you're doing those things, were you doing the entire city, or were you doing just Middletown?
We did it a couple of different ways. When we're doing this for a specific brand, we'll look at the Old Town District, sort of the defined geography. We'll look at things in a 1 and a 2 and a 3. We'll also take a look at existing products, like the product, Murdod's coming online, and look at some forecast of how that might impact. We would also look at sort of planned projects or potential, and I know Trent will cover some of those opportunities, and we actually would include some of those in our projection methodology. As we get out and look at just the overall trade area, we'll look at both the city limits, and then we'll look at a 10-minute trade area, which is actually the defined trade area that we had through customer intercepts. That's your current trade area for downtown is about 10 minutes. That's where the majority of the core population is coming from, about 65%. So I guess to answer your question, we look at it a lot of different ways depending on what we think would be valuable to the operator and help them support the business plan. When you look at the workforce population, Lewisville does have a substantial workforce and employment base. A lot of that doesn't necessarily have immediate impact on downtown, so you'd have to start to pull more tenants that have a little bit more substantial gravity. Again, another way that we would look at it is not only just workforce, but the workforce purchasing power. What is the typical spend per week in some of the businesses that are available in Lewisville, and then ultimately for downtown or different regions. We would take and capture this based on where the businesses are located and the proximity of some of this employment to be associated with downtown. And then ultimately we would take sort of the combined purchasing power. So this would be your workforce purchasing power, which would be the number of employees times their weekly spend and then annualized. And then we would also take a look at the population for Lewisville and then their income, and this will be the combination of those two statistics. And so when you start looking at sort of the combined purchasing power, and this would exclude the visitor, the commuter value, the purchasing power is pretty substantial in Lewisville. Then we started looking at things like, and this is, again, just more contextual, but just retail per square foot. Lewisville has a significant amount of existing retail, obviously, within the city limits. But if you look at the retail per capita, again, the performance is, it isn't necessarily commensurate with the opportunity, which means that you likely, and we'll show this later, that you're likely pulling from other communities to support your retail base, which is a good thing. But we think this also recognizes there's an opportunity probably from an optimization of your existing merchandising. As brands become sort of tired and old, we think there's an opportunity to sort of upgrade those concepts and continue to introduce sort of new, evolving, innovative concepts to increase that footprint. And then if you look at this, how would you measure the performance, the overall retail sales per square foot, you fall within, sort of in the middle of the pack regarding peers. And then this was a pull factor, a location quotient, looking at, from the distribution of retail sales, where are they actually coming from? A 1.0 would be essentially you're servicing a balanced market where you're basically, servicing the supply. As you can see, Grapevine is almost 2 times the gravity of what its market would support its population characteristics, and that's because Grapevine has a significant amount of restaurant and retail along its perimeter with a very low population. But as you can see, Flower Mound both is, and that's changing today with the new developments coming online, but currently Flower Mound has a majority of leakage, and Lewisville is serving both to currently Capella and Flower Mound in that distribution. And so part of our strategy is looking at what do the peering communities have and how are they merchandised and what are the nuances and where do we think we can be competitive in those areas. And part of that could be used in recruitment of downtown or start to capitalize the Hebron TOD or even Main Street or mall. So again, this is sort of the background of our overall strategy. If you remember, our original approach in Old Town was just to look at market conditions, look at the opportunities within those sectors, and start to look at categorically where are the opportunity. Start to look at tenants that are expanding that could activate the market, and then ultimately part of our process has been in the background is actually recruiting and helping these tenants underwrite with very specific projects, and we're still having ongoing conversations. You were asking about the trade area earlier. This shows the distribution of where the current customer shed is in relationship to who's shopping and eating downtown. I would anticipate as new projects come online that this footprint will continue to increase, which will grow your market opportunity within downtown. But currently, the population of downtown is about 7,000 people, a little over 7,000 people. But the trade area is about 200,000 people currently that could access or is currently accessing downtown. And each dot represents a customer that was eating or shopping in downtown at one of the retail locations in relationship to their household location. And then ultimately, we started looking at some of the core statistics for downtown, just the overall population, where the traffic counts. So we spent a lot of time looking at the traffic counts and the distribution so that we could monetize the commuter traffic. And then ultimately started looking at the current condition and the quality and the location and the serviceability of the existing retail. And we also looked at, I know there was originally some question on parking. Certainly from our standpoint, there's plenty of parking in downtown. Some of that is just where is parking distributed comparative to some of the retail opportunities, or we think maybe some of the additional spots, but overall, I think downtown's well served. And then we started looking at the purchasing power within that 1 mile or smaller district compared to maybe some of the other restaurant requirements. We also looked at just some of the drivers. Obviously downtown you've got City Hall, DCTA, now the Old Town development, which will be an anchor, the event center, the access to the hospital, and then both the employment and the patients. That I-35 to the 121 connection, the new residential developments that is underway. Tierney's obviously is a great anchor, and then just existing sort of eclectic Main Street businesses. Some are stronger than others, but we certainly think that adds to the character and historic assets. And then we spent a lot of time just looking at the overall strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats. For the most part, we want to understand what from an operator standpoint, what the objections are going to be so that we can mitigate some of those things in advance or further reinforce it with additional research and opportunities so that we can be aware of both where the opportunities are, but also what the concerns might be from a recruitment standpoint. And then, as we discussed earlier, this is sort of there's a tier or certain transition for attracting restaurant brands, and currently we looked at just the purchasing power around some of the more upscale brands or the more expensive brands, what you consider white tablecloth. If you look at the purchasing power of Lewisville, it's about $369,000, which is substantially lower than the majority. The only thing, the Kirby's in South Lake is a little bit more purchasing power, but obviously its trade area could be significantly larger. So these are some of the things that we've encountered and have to overcome in the recruitment process. But as you look at who's actually performing and attracting sort of the new millennial concepts, we spent a lot of time looking at concepts that sort of fit that income range and that could also create attraction for new millennial customers. And so we've been spending a lot of time looking at those sort of evolving niche brands that have a wider appeal. But their price point is a lot less and is more attractive to the younger crowd because they figure out a way to deliver sort of organic, unique concepts, but also a good value point. And ultimately, this is what I would assume that would be probably the demographic that you would be pursuing in downtown, both your residential and your shopper, is sort of the next evolution of consumer. And so this was our original, when we completed the original plan, our recommendation was to attract a destination restaurant to sort of reinforce the investments that you've already made at Old Town Plaza. That's already underway with the Old Town Development Group, and the irony in that. But we also recommended developing a downtown opportunity map, and I think Trent will be sharing these details with you later. So these things are already in place. We also would encourage you to leverage sort of the Old Town development activity for additional millennial restaurant concepts. My recommendation is you really need 3 to 5 sort of core destination concepts. Tierney's could be one of those, but with some of the concepts that are coming online, I think that'll continue to reinforce and start to develop the address for downtown. And we think the opportunities are still consistent to continue to increase the residential density between Mill Street and downtown, and just continue to reinforce that Main Street corridor, activating the Mill Street site, looking at food truck park for sort of temporary activation, and that could also be long-term, and then expanding the farmers market. And we talked about really digging a little bit deeper and looking at the housing topology and the demand and the need, and, which would help you guide and sort of inform the type of additional developers that you would need. So as part of our process, we started looking at very specific analytic areas. And so what we see is the future opportunities, we picked just sort of a few case studies to look at, but obviously one that you already own that's adjacent to the plaza that's under development and across from the Grand Theater would be a logical choice for us. And so our recommendation would be to look at activating that with the restaurant because of the gravity they can produce. But also we see, if you position it right, very similar to the Old Town project, that would require maybe a little bit of subordination of the assets, but wouldn't require necessarily a significant amount of additional cash in order to make that happen. And so we started testing what we think would be a realistic operator return in downtown today in relationship to the overall capitalization of the redevelopment. And we think that beyond maybe the participation in the building and the shell, the operator could absorb most of those costs, and it's something that you already own. As Nika said, just leveraging your existing assets. We also, and I'm not going to get necessarily site specific, but we looked at a couple of additional spaces on either new development or redevelopment. And I still think that based on where rents are today and where we anticipate restaurant performance could be, until the synergies in place, there's probably still a little bit of economic gap on just new build construction. This might be buying a smaller lot with some physical constraints but the land costs are fairly high, and we're still being conservative a little bit on the operator's performance and still really good empirical data. And then the other scenario, we still think there's probably a gap in taking some of these underperforming buildings and regentrifying them and sort of keeping the existing framework. And this is one that we modeled. The challenge with sort of properties like this is you want to make sure that it fits physically in the context of the vision of downtown. There's certainly some assets that need to be revitalized. And so my recommendation is if you can come in and reset the development pattern in a building that may not be worth saving, with the gap being equal, my recommendation is probably to encourage new development. And I'll show you some examples of those. This would be an opportunity for the bank property. We think that the key opportunities there would be to create sort of active patios and certainly at least do, if not a 45-degree patio, but maybe a 180-degree patio, both to get the relationship between the new plaza, the event center, and then obviously connect to what Old Town Center's doing. But we think those connections in the active patios is probably as important as anything. And then really upgrading the facade, the sort of the veneer on the bank property, I would say probably doesn't fit into the historic character or the definition of what you're looking at. And so this would be sort of an example of that. This example actually had a clock tower, so I thought that would certainly fit in. But again, just a destination active patio, but make sure that you maximize integration with the Old Town Plaza, and then looking at maybe a celebrity chef or somebody that has a name, especially that you can leverage the opportunity rather than trying to get sort of the lower tier concepts. And the other opportunity may be looking at doing some restaurant incubators, similar to what was done at Trinity Groves, where you're a little bit more optimistic about it, but you can have some criteria or hurdles where you have a little bit more filtering process of who that operator is. But those might have to come in and prove themselves. Another opportunity would be the K&W building. Obviously, there's some remediation that needs to be done, but in my mind, a very special building and something that has some definitely architectural characteristics. And so we just looked at existing sort of auto uses that have been retrofit. This is a garage bar that was in Lewisville, Kentucky, and another one that was in Northwood, Michigan that really kept that character. But these are very successful concepts that are producing what I would consider above average volumes that have been able to maintain the historic character. And I think that's why downtowns are so popular, because they are authentic spaces. And if you can keep some of those neat ideas that can be very, very successful. And this is another example of one that was done in Louisville, Kentucky. But my recommendation would be to preserve the exterior elevations. And then there's a wide range of uses that can fit in these buildings, because from a bike shop to coffee shops to boutique restaurants. We're real interested in sort of merchandising concepts around active living. And so if you can get maybe fitness-oriented things or even fitness uses, I think those can be very successful and can certainly have a wide appeal to the millennial customer. I think the city may have to look at partnering on the remediation cost, and then also any additional public improvements. I know the Mill Street project is one that's been on the works, but there may be some additional sort of public improvements to improve the area outside the right-of-way. And then I think there's a couple of options there. You either have to find a high-quality activation restaurant, or in this case, because of the remediation costs and the cost of the building and all the challenges, something like a bike shop or a coffee shop that has less capital requirements could be something that could minimize the gap requirement, but also provide something that's functionally missing within downtown to support some of the housing needs. And then we looked at the feed mill building. This one is sort of difficult because you've got a really a great core asset, but in my mind, this could be a lot of different things, and a lot of it depends on really how the residential evolves. But if you wanted to look at existing activation concepts, there's examples of a project in Michigan where they actually created a brewery or a winery, and they could bring back sort of the look of the feed mills, integrate it into the project. And this might be a location where you could do the temporary food trucks around there and use some of the existing structure, and they're very similar to what was done in Greenville, and then work on some activation concepts or maybe more permanent structures later down the road. So With that, Nika, do you have any other thoughts or questions? I know we're a little bit limited on time. I want to squeeze as much information as possible.
So do you want to go ahead and talk about the direction from his, or should we cover trends first?
Yes, I think we should. Well, I mean, it's up to the council, but that would be more information.
Yeah, in terms of giving overall direction on
Read the statutes.
Old
I
Town.
can stay, sure.
Because I think the basic question is, you've been working on Old Town for quite a while, there are things that are happening. What you've heard from Jason, what I think Trent is going to share with you, are some things where some things where you could step up the game. And the question will be, do you want to do that, how far, which ones of these items need to proceed? So,
How much?
huh?
How much?
How much money?
Give us a figure. Give us a dollar.
Trent's gonna do that.
Trent's going to do
Trent's gonna do
that.
that.
Yeah, that's where I'm thinking you should get Trent up here too. But that's the basic question is, you know, do you want to step up, and if so, where? Trent, what do you think?
The other question would be is how fast, right?
Yeah, right.
Just how fast certainly will.
We've been talking about every one of those for
20 years.
Right.
a long time. I know since City Hall has been there, we've been talking about every one of those exact locations. Just
Yes, sir.
One of these days, get a little bit of time.
Okay, Eric's gonna be my driver for me, so I can, not screw up the technology. No, I'm gonna go to PowerPoint presentation first, which will be, no, this one. We'll go out of Google Earth, do the PowerPoint, minimize here, go into the closation, march down, and then pull up mine. No, I don't think that's it. I don't know if you put it on your desktop. I don't think it's got a second. I think we got that one. It's on mine, but I'm driving. What it is. E. And retreat presentation. Okay, and you go to your slide view and not the side view. Oops. I got too close.
You already touched it.
Yeah, that's true. I'll screw that stuff in every minute. Oh my God. Play for me. Slideshow. There you go. Okay, I'm gonna kind of pony on the back of some of what Jason talked about and then get a little specific on a few things. And there's two pieces to my presentation. The first one's really going to be talking about some things that are appropriate discussions for open session as it relates to philosophy and direction. But then the second half of mine is executive session, which will be under 572. Section 572.
Whatever this says.
So there'll be two pieces. We'll probably have time for a break before we go to the executive session portion of it. Just from a big picture standpoint, one of the things I want to be able to do is quickly review your town priorities from the 2025 plan. That's not so much for you. That's so that I can be grounded kind of in where this needed to go and what we need to talk about going forward. Then we're going to talk a little bit about understanding where we are today. The existing values downtown, some target area specific information, existing uses, some of the catalyst activity, things that Jason's mentioned, things you talked about last night about the things that are creating the energy for us. The TIF 1 status is a very important discussion to this when it comes to the financial piece of it. We're going to talk about Old Town potential, redevelopment opportunities. We're going to talk about prioritizing those opportunities. What are some of the impediments to moving forward? What are some of the tools that we have to overcome those impediments? And as I said, we're going to then go into executive session under 551.072. So, and you're going to have to click these one at a time. This came directly out of, first click, the 2025 plan. It says prepare real estate investment analysis to identify catalytic development sites. So within that, first click, we have developed a baseline map for future redevelopment opportunities, identify possible consolidation of parcels for more feasible projects. So there's two pieces to this. There's this document, which I'm not handing out because it has prospective pricing on it, which we don't want to become public information at this point. This is every single property that exists within your TIF 1. This is the database that this refers to. It's the data on which the map you'll see later is built. We now know every single property, every single value that there is in TIF 1. And we've been able to put that into a format that we can now manipulate it and look at it in terms of what ifs, using different variables of cost, different variables of value, different variables involving acquisition and sale, and ultimately all the way down to potential ROI. So this document is frankly one that you've been needing for a long time, because this becomes really the financial foundation for every decision that we have to make when it comes to downtown. And thank goodness we have Denton County Appraisal District data, because boy, without this would have taken 6 months. So hats off to Rudy and his group, because they have some great information for us. Second element of that plan was, in conjunction with the baseline map, develop a market value assessment of each block to identify possible phasing of development. That's obviously a Herculean task, but what we have done there is go about that from a standpoint of priority with some assumptions, and I'm going to go over those assumptions in just a moment. Next is to map the physical impediments by identifying infrastructure routings that do not allow full block redevelopment. That is not as complicated as it seems. And as we looked at downtown and started looking at where the potential corridors were for additional growth, this is really something that gets done through redevelopment, and it's not something I'm going to consider a big impediment, because as we program in the redevelopment of some of these parcels, we program in the additional infrastructure that it takes to make those parcels accessible. So that's really not a huge impediment for us, especially downtown, because we've got decent access. Then consolidate these findings to identify a primary and a secondary block holding development potential. And that's going to be a function of a map that I'm going to show you in executive session. So, next. Where we go from there is, proactively seek out developers using this analysis as tools for discussion. I took every single one of these as my direction to move this thing forward. And we've got answers, I think, on every single one of those points. And there's no reason, as we leave here today, that we don't have very specific steps that we can take now to make these things happen. So, excellent. All right, so let's talk about initial kind of target ideas and target areas. I have no idea why that one is there, but it's not supposed to be yet. This kind of shows, you're all familiar with the TIF area. This is obviously the eastern section of the TIF. City Hall is here, the DCTA station is over here, and this is your TIF boundary. We use this purple to define that target area. The reason we did that was kind of twofold. A couple of months ago, DCTA came to us and said, we've got some really big ideas about what we'd like to accomplish in downtown Lewisville, or certainly somewhere within our system. And it was very, very aggressive, very optimistic plans about what could happen around future DCTA infrastructure. We've taken those plans, those maps, and we've integrated them into some of the discussions that we have today. It creates an opportunity for us, frankly, whether it happens or not, because this is a natural bookend and a natural magnet for us when it comes to development options, because this corridor system creating opportunities for pedestrian traffic to get to the train is huge for us. We need to be able to capitalize on it. So one of the things we want to be able to do to meet Jason's obligation, which is we want to create a higher income wealth per capita, we want to create it downtown in a more dense environment. One of the things we want to take advantage of is the fact that they can walk literally and be on the train to go to downtown. So I think it really shrinks the distance from us to that higher demographic area, like Jason was saying we need to do. And then for now, we book into the other side with basically City Hall and the Grand Theater. Now that seems like a small area, but it's a gigantic area when you start talking about value and cost and opportunities for redevelopment. So, Eric, let's hit the next one. Within this target area, just within the little purple lines that I just showed you, based on DCAD 2014 road, the appraised value of those properties within the boundaries and included in TIF 1 is $154,269,694. So there's a lot of value in that small area. There's a whole lot of lots, there's a lot of development, and even though it looks small on the map, it's pretty big, good sized spot. Based on the 2014 rolls, the appraised value of properties within the boundaries and not included in the TIF is $3,058,208. Remember, when you built the TIF, you had limitations on how that TIF could be constructed based on your 30% residential limitation. So there were a lot of residential areas that were intentionally carved out of the TIF. The good news about that is most of those areas that were carved out are in good shape. They're residential uses that frankly have been redeveloped and they're very good shape. So there's not a huge problem as it relates to those areas needing redevelopment. On the other side of the coin, we don't have a lot of upside on those areas since they're not in the TIF when it comes to value. So the current sales tax that's generated in that entire TIF is about $177,000 a year. Where's Brenda? If I say something wrong, scratch something. Brenda was incredibly helpful in getting all of these numbers for us. And this sales tax number is an important number because this is a number that within that area, we really need to see go much, much higher. That's not the number that, frankly, I was hoping we would see. I was hoping we would see about twice that in that area. So it underscores, I think, one of the things that Jason said is that, we don't necessarily have the natural demographics that support a gigantic sales tax stream in the downtown area. So one of the things we've got to do is change that trajectory. We've got to change that paradigm. And that's going to equate to something else Jason said, which is you have to be able to focus on that residential piece. What that residential piece looks like, the density of that, and most importantly, what the value of those improvements are going to be. So those existing values, these are the existing uses within that small area. We have 30 residential lots that are essentially undeveloped today within that area that typically you would look at residential. We have 70 retail and commercial lots within that area. These are the square footages that are reflected there. And then we've got 10 tax exempt lots in that small area too. A lot of these lots are larger than what you would consider, but these are acreages and not lots in some cases because there's a lot of vacant space out there. So that's kind of what we had to work with to start, okay? The catalyst activity, which you guys have talked about a lot, and I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail. The fact that you've done all of these things already, I think, is huge. I think some of the things that are encouraging is when you look at the new approved residential, the success of the residential on Keeley Street, what apparently is Murdoch's very, very aggressive and optimistic pricing on the new homes that are going to be going in south of downtown. Their initial price point on those they thought would be around $230,000, $240,000. Now they're talking probably $250,000 as a base and maybe even higher than that. So there is some pent-up demand, ironically, for that higher priced product close to downtown. That's something we absolutely want to capitalize on and frankly increase it as we go. You already have systems in place, your facade renovation grants, the 2025 plan, the I-35 corridor overlay. There's a lot of energy and activity that ultimately I think supports where we need to go. Okay, so let's talk about the TIF performance. And again, Brenda was incredibly helpful in putting this in place for us. The reason the TIF is such a focus in this process is because the way the TIF was built was not a flat amortization schedule. The TIF was built on a balloon payment schedule, which means your principal and interest payments go up every year. So if you have surplus in the beginning, you got to be real careful because as those payments go up, that surplus is going to disappear. And that's what you've seen happen. The yellow represents the debt payment, which again, you can see this trajectory going this direction. And this is 2015. If this were scattered out all the way here to 2020, this goes kind of like, golly.
And this is your debt payment on the MCL grant.
That trajectory would look kind of like that. All right, so, and we're going to show you that in just a second. This is important because when you look at the property taxes that we are getting to be able to make those payments, there's going to be quickly an intersection in that line that we've got to contemplate, okay? This is your TIF fund balance. This is great news because as we started, those principal and interest payments were very low. Gave us an opportunity to create some surplus, and that takes us several years down the road. But without growth in that surplus, we have problems. So this is the debt service payments. Again, looking at the debt service obligation over these years, taking us out, that trajectory is pretty steep. This is our current fund balance right here. This fund balance obviously will begin to deteriorate as those lines cross. And in fact, I think the first time this year, 2013, we actually took some from fund balance to make the debt service payment. So as we see ad valorem values grow, that takes up some of the gap, certainly. But it's not gonna take up enough gap in existing conditions to be able to cover that debt service payment without some new growth and some new infills in there. And this just kind of outlines what that current schedule of requirements is in your TIF. If you look at your principal number right here, your interest number right here, you can see this ballooning principal. We are right here in 2014-15 at 245,000. And this is down here where we're going, which is 980,000. So that obligation is significant. That was the correct way to do this when it started because of the purpose and because of the existing balance. So you didn't have a gigantic amount of choice in getting this thing started. But I think what it does do is it points out a couple of things about how we may want to rethink that TIF going forward. To that end, we've looked at some potential refinancing options, and we're not here today saying that the refinancing is going to be on your next agenda. But it's something that we've spent some time with First Southwest, that Brenda's talked to Jason Hughes about, and we've looked at some different options. At this point in time, we're not ready to recommend one over the other, but one of the things that we need to be able to do is amend that trajectory where our debt service payment exceeds our revenues. And one of the ways we can do that is begin to flatten that debt service payment out and then support it with new revenues. That basically says be looking at refinancing. Now, Brenda will tell you she will be coming to you with a refinancing no matter what happens in this room, because you have a normal process of looking at savings that results from refinancing based on interest rate changes. So we're going to see that anyway. That will help us, but it's not going to be enough to cover all of the gaps. So one of the things we've talked about doing is what if we refunded that existing debt with no savings, but essentially extended that debt for 10 years on a flat schedule. This essentially shows where we are with it. That would end up costing us over the term $1,502,000. Somehow this is your fault. Whereas if we took that same debt and said, okay, we're going to take it over 20 years, the callable portion of that debt, take it over 20 years on a flat schedule, it's going to cost us $1,035,000. So this begins to be something that may be a potential for us. Now, what we're talking about doing, and the way these numbers are going to work, does not, let me emphasize that, does not require significant increases in the TIF revenue to make the deal work. It helps. One of the things that the TIF does for us, it doesn't just provide that ad valorem, it also provides us for some infrastructure improvements that today we really don't have the money to go out there and do in cash. So we got to be conscious of the fact that, you know, while where we're headed is not completely reliant on this, this gives us some room in that TIF if that becomes an opportunity for us over the next 4 to 6 months. So that will be things to come. We'll talk more about that over the next several weeks. So that's some of the refinancing options that we've looked at to create some TIF room. Any questions on that so far?
Did we look at also just paying down some of the balance?
We haven't looked at it from a cash perspective, but it's certainly something we can do, Mayor. I think the reason that we wouldn't want to get too aggressive about paying the balance down right now is because we've already hit that point one time where the debt service and revenues didn't meet up.
Right.
So we got to protect most of that cash, at least for the next 3 years while that principal obligation goes up. But if we go in and decide to refinance it, and we find a lower interest rate by virtue of the callable debt that's on the table today, and then restructure with a flat schedule, we very well may find that some application of cash to that might be a good idea.
Can you use general fund money to pay down the balance?
Yes, they're COs.
Not TIF money?
They're all
They're
COs.
COs.
This is not a revenue debt at all. We have every opportunity.
So if you did that, it wouldn't affect what you're saying?
That's right. That's correct.
In fact,
It-
I would think it'd be good to look at that option with the general fund balance that we've got. And look at maybe reducing that, which doesn't put quite as much bind on
That's right.
you as far as going
and
forward.
that's certainly possible, Mayor. In fact, we restructured this last year based on our internal audit. So we actually have moved all that debt to your debt service fund, and your payments are transfers from the TIF fund. So that's easier to draw down that debt service fund for that purpose.
Yeah, your debt service rate right now is more than substantial because we are not issuing any debt at the moment because we don't have the authorization, so we have some wiggle room there.
Smith, I just think it'd be another option to look at.
Yeah.
It is.
And do it.
You know, the fortunate thing about Lewisville is you've done such a great job of preserving your cash.
Right.
And keeping it in a place where it's usable is just going to be huge as we go through this process. It also defines, frankly, how aggressive we can be, not just on this project, but on all these projects. There's some pretty important prioritization that's to take place to do that. My philosophy as we've come into this has been, let's not spend any money that we can't turn around and make money on in 3 years.
And that was, I guess, my thought, because we're looking at other TIFs, or as we want to call them, in other parts of the city that maybe have a potential to grow the TIF much larger than this TIF and faster than this TIF possibly.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, in fact.
So we could use that leverage in other places where it's going to grow faster and the TIF's going to grow quicker than it is in this Old Town area, so we can use that to get it down to help facilitate that.
Yeah, it relieves the cash obligation, so it creates more opportunity and additional surplus through those additional tips.
Right.
Absolutely. So one of the things we want to talk about was what really is our potential. And again, I know you've gone through some of this already, but the new development opportunities that are at hand, the 3 restaurants that Nick has put together, obviously are crucial. The plaza is one of the coolest things. I actually bring people. I know that you all have perspective on the plaza because of its slowness, and I appreciate that. But you know, when I bring folks to town and show them, nobody knows how long it's taken to do that, and they don't care. They're going like, wow, that's going to be really cool for downtown. So I've seen that as nothing but a positive. I know you're ready to get finished, and everybody else is too. But it is a huge marketing.
Thank you, Trent.
Checks in the mail.
My only concern is if we get it finished, Steve might retire.
The Keeley Street residential has been incredibly popular. What I mentioned earlier, and what we're going to talk more about in the executive session, the DCTA opportunity as it relates to potential assembly. The normal market maturation down there. As some of these properties, and you're going to see this in kind of some value discussions within that in a few minutes. Some of these properties are transitioning on their own. One of the fears is the direction that they transition. And it kind of puts us, from a governmental standpoint, one of the things we'd like to do is let the market do what the market does and be very careful about how we inject ourselves into that market. But if it begins to transition the wrong way, we got to be really, really concerned about that. That was one of the lessons that I had to learn the hard way in Grapevine. When I first got to town, the entire downtown area was transitioning, all of it, but it was transitioning exactly 180 degrees in the direction it should have been transitioning. Instead of emphasizing the opportunities downtown and creating additional retail, we were putting plexiglass and vinyl coverings on the brick downtown, and we were taking what was some of the nice old single family that existed downtown just a block off the street. We were turning that into mini storage warehouses and low-cost apartments. Because the idea was, we'd given up, I hate to say that, but 1634 West was going to be the death of the city. And everybody had said, we can't overcome the impact of 1634 West. On Main Street, it literally lined up about 40 feet off Main Street. And we talked about that landing pattern for 1634 West. So legitimate fear, certainly, but today, ironically, we all kind of took some chances and said, well, let's just assume what happens if it doesn't get built. And wow, what a gigantic change happened. If we would have kept that trajectory and allowed the market that was there because of that fear continue to drive those decisions, there would be no 1634 West there today, and there would be no viable downtown. Is the model. 1634 West. It was a runway. The new runway on the west side of the airport. Oh. Yeah, big, huge monster runway. And, freaked everybody out. That's before the days of the stage 3 sound mitigation, and every plane that came over. If you ever played, golf on the Grapevine golf course before, 1995, you better be a darn good golfer, because when you get to your backswing, a pretty good chance you're going to hear about 80 decibels over your ear with a plane coming over your head. So it's a different world now, and those things have been mitigated. But my point in illustrating that is, if we don't take some aggressive lead in determining what that transition trajectory is, we can become victims of it. And that's where I salute you for being so aggressive about saving money because some of that's gonna require some investment, I think, from the city standpoint. So, to the redevelopment opportunities, those transition uses, many of what's vacant today, we don't want to go back into the use that was there. We want to be able to go back to a mixed use. There's not going to be another 3.5 million square feet of retail downtown. Jason will tell you there are market conditions that he's already talked to you about that are going to limit that. But if we're strategic about how those uses begin to transition and careful about how we allow those to transition, we'll see some of those vacant uses going to mixed use, some of the single-family uses to office, and some of the other single-family to retail, depending on its proximity to these two bookends, those being City Hall and the train station. So again, we're going to see some maps on that in a little while. So what we've done, and again, this will get into the executive session discussion because it involves assembly, is we have created sort of a matrix. You're going to see renditions of the high and the medium today. There's a lot longer list of these that are not going to be pertinent to today's discussion, but again, every property on this list fits in this matrix, and there's 650 something entries in these property loans. The high priority opportunities that we look at, again, are proximity to those bookends, being the City Hall and the DCTA station. Within the DTCA concept design, DCTA concept design, top of it there, which we're going to show you. Undeveloped properties today, properties that are currently for sale or in foreclosure, or properties that are in deteriorated condition that the opportunity may have been created for that property being purchased. So those are how we listed the high priorities. The medium priorities were proximity to the high priority because if we have one parcel that looks like it makes sense, but it's surrounded by parcels that keep us being able to develop in any kind of mass, then we got to rethink how we do that. So we've included some of those medium priorities in the list simply because we need the surrounding mass to be able to transition that use. The single family uses that are there today are going to have to give way to some areas that would be higher end single family attached uses, not dramatically different than what you've already approved south of Main Street. So that's going to give us a different density profile than what the existing single-family uses downtown exist. But that gives us those population numbers that Jason was saying we simply have to be able to generate the kind of retail interest that we need. So the other medium priorities are incompatible uses in proximate to high priority, which become a problem for us in assembly, and properties that are high risk for deterioration. A lot of this was just driving through, literally driving the streets to see what these properties look like. And you've done that a lot more than I have, and there will be no surprises, I'm sure. When you do that. And finally, low priority opportunities, which can become an impediment to us because if we have significant low priority opportunities surrounding what we consider to be high priorities, that's a difficult deal because we're not going to go out there and start bulldozing existing viable businesses and buying those things up. It's crazy. We're not going to do it. So when we have fully developed properties with operating businesses, or properties that are unlikely to be transitioned in the next 5 years, or their adjacency does not practically lend themselves toward reuse, we simply skipped over. Those become low priority. So that's kind of the priority matrix that we use to build the list. So what are the impediments to success? Not surprising, every single property downtown is worth more than what it should be. And it only takes a few phone calls without anybody knowing who's calling to realize that there is an inflated perception of value today downtown. Certainly not one that the market by itself would take care of, otherwise we would have already seen dramatic changes. So the evidence is demanding proof. The existing conditions requiring significant capital. Some of the buildings that you saw that Jason mentioned, if those buildings were usable today, and we could put something in those today without having to spend $600,000 or $700,000 to put the building into a usable condition, then it would be a little different financial circumstance. But when we're going into a circumstance where we're already $700,000 behind on a building, just to get the building up to code before we spend one penny on the additional finish out, that makes a very difficult circumstance for reuse. The proximity of uses unlikely to redevelop. Again, there are a lot of these things where we have unlikely and frankly unwieldy adjacent uses that are going to be difficult for us. The inability to acquire adequate parking. That's going to be a gigantic issue downtown. Parking is a huge issue. And, when you're talking about single family attached residential, those properties in and of themselves, because of that proximal relationship, are not gonna be able to afford to have parking garages. That's gonna be a deal killer. So we're gonna have to look at what it takes to get the parking pretty close to the site. And if we end up with parking garages, they're gonna be down the road because of what they do to the cost equation. Access improvement, again, that's not a huge one, but one of the things I think we've got to be thinking about is what is the pedestrian movements that want to happen once we get away from the plaza and the Grand Theater? What's the pedestrian movement that wants to take place to and from the train station? And what can we do to make that better? Because if you look at it today, it's not exactly inviting. I mean, if I happen to live downtown and want to go to the train station, it's not real clear how I get there or what I do to make that happen. So we have to start looking at right-of-way and how much space we have and what we can do within that right-of-way, or what we potentially would do in a redeveloped circumstance to give us right-of-way that creates pedestrian access to and from east to west from these buildings. Weak private investment interest, that again is self-explanatory. We've not seen the dollars come in on their own downtown. The existing tip obligation is an impediment because we do have that circumstance where our revenues are not going to meet our expenses without some changing. Policy clarity, that's one of the things we're going to talk about today, is we have to decide what it looks like, how fast we accomplish it, what our appetite is for this kind of endeavor, because this is not for the weak of heart. And frankly, an accountable champion. And I'll say this a lot. As we go through these projects and decide what we're going to do, quote unquote, we also have to decide who's going to be the person that's accountable. And Donna's not accountable for everything on every project. I mean, there has to be champions that we establish. Steve Backus happens to be the individual who loves the fact that he's the champion for the plaza. And everybody else loves the fact that he's the champion for the plaza too. But the fact is, as we go through it, you got to be pretty specific about who's going to accomplish these tasks and what that accomplishment trajectory looks like. Because if we can't change it, we can't measure it. And my deal is all about measure and change. I mean, I want to be able to show what's happened from here to here, and then what it took to make it happen. If we don't know essentially what's going on, there's no way we can ever go out there and measure our progress towards it. So, but there's a lot of tools that we're going to be talking about that overcome those impediments. We've talked about TIF and potential refinancing. We've talked about residential redevelopment incentives, and you've done that. That's what essentially allowed the single-family attached product to come about south of downtown. The existing overlay, there's more things we can do with that. Zoning is our friend in this circumstance, and it's going to help us encourage ownership to do things that reflect this mixed-use opportunity. New special districts, I do think there's going to be some opportunities potentially to even overlay a PIT on top of the TIF in some cases. And that actually works, because what it does is it creates an additional layer of taxes, but it's being taxed on the people that are using it, and it's part of what they're going to calculate in as their cost of living downtown. It's going to give us yet another revenue stream. It has to be done in larger pieces. You can't do it in small bites, but it will give us opportunities for new revenues, which I think could be helpful to us. Market study updates, Jason is the best there is in what he does. I want to keep him very engaged in this process, because knowing what to step and where to step and making sure that we don't get so askew with the market is going to be what determines our financial sustainability on this. So keeping experts close makes good sense. And then master developer consideration. I think one of the things that we have to be able to do is say, let's not just sit and wait for the market to happen. We go out there and buy this or buy that or redevelop this or that, and we wait. I think we've got to be aggressive about this. I think we've got to go out there and bring in those that we know have the capacity and the experience and the track record in doing master development work, and not one, but many, and start showing how this works and why this works. Even to the point that if we decide to do some charrettes to show how properties can transition and what they look like, I would like to have us, the owners of the property, and the potential buyers of the property in the room and be a part of that charrette process. So we really kind of create a little bit different position on how we go about this. A lot more aggressive than typically you do. But I think that's one of the things we do, is look at master developers that have experience in mixed-use development and those that have experience with residential development. And finally, where we're going to go next is a strategic decision, and I'll save most of those comments for executive session, which is now. So we'll take a break, or?
Sharon, I'll make-
Yeah, Jason, sure.
I'll make
Okay,
it.
we need a break, or are you okay? We don't have a break scheduled right now. 3:45, so, okay, let's take one.
Let me pick up Jason's question first, I'm sorry.
One other thing that you could look at doing, I mean, just from a market standpoint, you know, multifamily is obviously hot right now, and you guys are in a real good position for that product type. So there's a couple things you can either encourage the developers to raise the game on the existing projects that they're bringing to the market, which you may want to do anyway, or give them an opportunity to come into downtown and maybe some relaxed, you know, opportunities, or maybe a little bit, you know, co-investment, so that you can increase the appetite for downtown investment rather than getting a suburban walk-up in a place that you really don't need it. So.
That's a good point. All right, good.
Okay, 10-minute break.